Hello, and welcome to our Mentor Fireside Chat and impact of mentoring on young people's mental health and wellness. We're going to give folks a few moments to settle in. And please, as you do settle in, there's a short poll on your screen. If you want to go ahead and participate in the poll, that would be great. And we will start in a few moments. Okay, fantastic. Well, again, welcome everyone to the second installation of our Fireside Chat series. We're thank you for joining us on today, and we have a fantastic panel of experts and thought leaders that we're going to get to in just a few moments. But we want to appreciate those of you that have answered the poll here. And we really were interested in seeing what brought you to this conversation. And as we can see, 52% of you are saying leaving with new ideas and actual solutions. And I'm sure that you will indeed do that in short time. And for those of you to learn and be in community, equally, this will be a place for you. And indeed, we will have an opportunity for raising some key questions as well. We want to be appreciate the over 250 folks that have registered for this webinar. That is a phenomenal number of folks that want to be in conversation with us here at Mentor and with our panelists. Many of those of with their expertise. If you will, want to thank our Mentor affiliate in Minnesota, led by Sarah Schaefer, who is a part of our panelists this today. And also want to be in gratitude for Alexandra Waxer, the director at Healthy Gamer Institute, and Mark Brown, Senior Vice President of Talent Acquisition at Starbucks, who happens to be a longstanding Starbucks, that is, supporter and partner of ours here at Mentor. We're so grateful for their partnership and their support in helping us to achieve and do much of the work that we do around mentoring across the United States more broadly. We know that in our conversation today, we want to talk about relationships. And here at Mentor, we have a vision where there's a future where relationships power opportunity for all. And we focus on that and come into this conversation understanding that we did a study a few years ago, Who Mentored You? And 58% of young people in that study suggested that their mentors supported their mental health. And so the relationships that a young person has with their mentor is really generative and one that is vastly helpful to them. And we're going to ensure in this conversation get into much of that. And one recent study, matter of fact, found that over 25% of high school students reported declines in their mental health during an academic year. We understand over the last number of years, we've heard the call to action around loneliness and social isolation. We know that American youth today are facing increased rates in suicide. Um, and for many populations across our youth sector, depression and anxiety are on the uptick. And that's all very unfortunate. That's why that makes this conversation even more poignant today. And we're excited about your questions, but also looking forward to the conversation. And so with that, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, our Chief Development Officer, Nikki Ruiz de Liziaga, who's going to facilitate this conversation today. And so, Nikki, I'm going to turn over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jermaine. Welcome, everybody. I'm Nikki Ruiz-Luzuriaga. I'm the Chief Development Officer at Mentor. And like Jermaine said, I'll be helping to moderate our discussion today. Just a reminder that if you need captions today, please select that option in the buttons below on your screen. You can get closed captioning for the discussion. Also, we are going to have a question and answer session. This will be very, we hope to have it be very interactive with all of you. But if you have questions during the panel, we ask that you just put them into the Q&A section, which is sort of on the bottom of your screen. You can find that Q&A button and put those in there, not in the chat section. The chat section just becomes very hard to manage with other people putting stuff in there. So anyway, if you could just use that Q&A section, that would be really helpful. So again, I'd like to thank each of our panelists for joining us. Again, it's Alexandra Waxer, LCSW, who's the director of the Healthy Gamer Institute, Sarah Schaefer, executive director of Mentor Minnesota, and Mark Brown, SVP of Talent and Acquisition at Starbucks. Thanks again for being with us today. So with growing division and isolation, quality mentoring support has never been needed more for our nation's children. Our hope is that this conversation sparks an ongoing dialogue that drives our shared efforts to push forward positive change for young people. And so again, as we're having this discussion, please feel free to put those questions in a Q&A so that we can get to them. Before we get started with, this topic, I wanted to start just by asking each of our panelists to briefly just share, kind of get us centered in relationship first. And so if you could just briefly share how mentoring relationships have positively impacted your life. I just find it's really nice to kind of start with by remembering that mentoring isn't something that like, oh, some people need or something like that. It's really something that each and every one of us benefits from. So Alexandra, I'll call on you first.
Sure. I think the thing that really like stands out, whether it's been me getting mentored and the thing that I've kind of tried to impart anytime I sort of feel like I'm in that mentorship role, has really been showing that authenticity. I know there are different points, whether I was a teenager, or especially when I was in grad school, that certain roles and different accomplishments really felt distant and sort of abstract and intangible. But seeing like a real human that was showing up as they are, sometimes they were tired, sometimes they really had it, sometimes they were frustrated. That really helped show me the human side, and that openness and honesty really kind of took those roles off of this like unreachable pedestal and made them feel like they were attainable to me, or like they were something that I could kind of step into. So they helped to bridge that gap between where I was and kind of where I wanted to be, whether it's exactly where they were or somewhere else. And I think especially thinking about how mentoring impacted like my mental health and thinking about the youth I've worked with, like that specific thing really like helped give hope to just everything of hope of like, oh, this is how I change it. Oh, I don't have to be this perfect kind of specimen of that I would put up on this pedestal of how do I get here. It's like, it's all, no one's perfect. And these are the steps that we take, and you can be a human and accomplish what you want. So yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much, Alexandra. Mark?
All right. So I love starting this way. So I would say, mentoring for me is it's a lifelong journey, and I see that in others as well. And for me, mentoring has played a humongous role because I mean, I think our own lived experience plays into all the things. And I'm a middle child. I think there's some things about being a middle child. And I would say that initially, one of the things that really impacted me was just somebody seeing me, right? And because I think we live in our own skin, and so we don't know what our capabilities are and our skills are. They just seem normal to us, right? And I think for me, mentoring helped me understand what some of those things are that I think I have to offer. And then just lifelong, my whole career has been about mentoring and being a mentee. And the thing I will tell you is that mentoring is not a one-way conversation. It's not a one-way relationship. It goes in both directions. And the more senior you get, either in life or in an organization, the more you need to connect with people that are earlier on in their career. And so the thing is, or earlier on in their journey. And I would say that the humanness that you get, from people that you think are either more senior than you in life or in a workplace, and just understanding that there are some very normal things for just the human condition. And one of the things is we all operate with a bit of an imposter syndrome. And understanding that, and it's there, then you know how to operate with it and around it. And so I just think about mentorship as people who can give you, and I felt this throughout my whole life, it's like people who can give you a sense of some of those outward strengths that show up, people that can kind of shorten that time frame to development for you, and then people who can normalize some of the things, similar to what Alexandria said. It's like, it's like some of the things you think are only yours to exist in, and you hear it from other people, and then all of a sudden, then you know how to deal with it, and you know that it's a bit more normal, and it gives you a bit of a way to navigate through it. So thank you for the question. I love this one.
Thanks so much, Mark. Sarah?
I echo you, Mark. This is one of my favorite questions, and I feel like I have two really pivotal mentors from when I was a kid, like a preteen, teen, who were incredibly pivotal in my life. And one was my librarian, Judith Blank, who I spent all my free time with. And to contextualize how close we were, she gave me the last Harry Potter book the day before it was released because she knew that I would like it so much. And she really taught me that, I was also a middle child, and I grew up a queer kid in rural Maine in a family with significant mental health and addiction issues. She was one of the first people that saw me as an individual and valued me for it. And that's, a memory and a feeling I carry with me every day. And the second was my music teacher, who knew I was really struggling with my own mental health and offhand shared an anecdote about how his daughter got help for her mental health. And that was the catalyst that I needed to take care of my own mental health when I was a kid. So my mentors are two people that I credit with being where I am today. And mentoring, I know, has had such a big impact on me. And I see the power of connection and mentoring as being a really key tool to supporting young people today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's beautiful. So Alexandra, to get us kicked off, loneliness and isolation have become a really critical public health concern, especially with increased levels of anxiety, stress, depression, and other mental health challenges among young people. Can you talk a little bit about how feelings of loneliness and isolation have shifted and manifested themselves in the 21st century, especially when we consider how different generations interact with each other and with technology that was designed to sort of connect people, which may also have unintended consequences?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think especially the digital natives or millennials and younger are sort of faced with this unique paradox where we have all these tools for virtual connection and socialization, but we're facing those increasing rates of loneliness. I think it's something like 2 in 5 Americans report feeling lonely, with it being Gen Z kind of feeling the loneliest of any generation, and then millennials, and then kind of up from there with the greatest generation, I think, having like the least of 38% or something like that loneliness, versus Gen Z, who I think is almost at 50%, who report feeling kind of consistent loneliness. There's a lot of things I think that are attributed to this. I think obviously a lot of times technology likes to be thrown in there, but I think there's also like just our lifestyle trends, especially in the West, of prioritizing work. We live further away from loved ones, as well as, social media and sort of that discount to social interaction. I messaged my friends, things like that, that are definitely kind of impacting that loneliness. I do think it's important, though. I think it's not necessarily the screens, but it's kind of those systems that the screens are part of. And I definitely think the experience of that loneliness or increased by the screens, with the kind of thing, like there's a collapse of boundaries between spaces. I think about kids that I've worked with who they get social media pop-ups of what's going on with their friends, or when they're trying to be with their friends, they get your homework's due, they get this, they get your things are kind of constantly, there's no boundaries between when they're thinking about one thing or the other. That kind of chronic exposure without any kind of break creates really persistent stress, and that sort of is what we see leading to anxiety and depression. Obviously, a lot of the anonymity and the sort of exploitation and cyberbullying that can happen in those spaces. And then again, with capitalism, with the algorithms, they're incentivized to exploit that kind of the loneliness. They're not really, the technology might be there for human connection, but they're not really designed to connect people. They're there to kind of maximize engagement and profit, and they exploit kind of those emotional vulnerabilities to become monetizable assets. We see that with dating apps and things where you have to pay to get more people or pay to message somebody, and that's kind of becoming more and more kind of pervasive throughout all different types of technology. And especially since COVID, technology is so integrated in young people's lives that it's unavoidable. But yeah, like I said, I don't know that it's technology, it's more how we are using it. I think it's important to also recognize like digital platforms are huge, like they can be a lifeline and a place of community, and for people to connect and find people like them, for especially younger generations, no matter where they're located or who they are, they can find it, kind of explore for themselves. And it's really just about finding and supporting places that are meaningful and inclusive and kind of positive, as opposed to I think about it like the junk food kind of social media and things like that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Or sorry, Alexandra, sorry. I'm going to turn now to Mark. Mark, given that Surgeon General, the former Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, he highlighted the potential impacts of social media on young people's mental health, and also separately sort of talked about the loneliness as being an epidemic as well. But how can we as talent leaders or mentors create supportive environments that address these challenges? So specifically, what role do mentorship programs and positive adult relationships play in mitigating these impacts? And how do we ensure that young people feel empowered and supported in their digital interactions?
Okay, that's a big, complex question. But as I jump into it, first I have to acknowledge Alexandra dropped a lot of nuggets and a lot of data and a lot of good things on us just now. This is what I would say is like, when I was younger, I heard a lot of different things and a lot of different advice that as you start to have more experiences in life, they start to mean more to you, right? Like one of the things, that I heard early on and I didn't know what it meant was it was like comparison is the thief of joy. Right. And I just thought, okay, that's just a statement someone says. It doesn't really mean anything. And it is profoundly meaningful because when you think about, loneliness and you think about how you compare your own situation to others, I would propose to you that you are exactly where you should be. And when we operate in this presence of this is my journey is not the journey of someone next to me, and trying not to compare that journey, it does bring you more joy. It really does. And it helps you understand where you are, where you want to go. And another thing that was said to me early on in life is get to know who you are, right? And that's so hard. When people say get to know who you are, what does that mean? People spend whole lifetimes trying to get to know who they are. And I would say that what's helped me and what I see around me, and especially in a corporate environment, because all the things come to life in terms of who people are and what their behaviors are and what they value, is find something that you're passionate about that you can measure by yourself, right? That you measure, what's important to you and what your values are. That's incredibly important. At Starbucks, we are really clear about values. And so we have five values, and two of those, one is belonging and another one is joy. And so when you really think about, belonging versus loneliness, it's like when you feel, seen, heard, and valued for the uniqueness that you bring to a situation, that's so important because what what's unique about you is different than other people. And once you get to a place where you can understand that you are exactly the way you're supposed to be, there's joy in that. There really is. And so for us, we're such a values-based organization. I'm sure just about everybody's been to a Starbucks. And if you've been to more than one, it's like they feel different. You walk into one, it's about the girls' volleyball team, right? You walk into another one, it's about puppies. Another one's about kittens, right? And so for us, it's really important that we honor belonging. And so when we think about our stores, we think about we want to create warmth and belonging, and we want to be a part of the communities that we're in. And what that means is that you value people the way they are. You're not trying to change people. And so I would say, just in terms of loneliness, loneliness is no, it's about knowing yourself, and it's about knowing who you want to surround yourself with, right? And so when you think about social media and all the things that are going on and all the different platforms, a lot of times when you're watching people, they're giving you information, but if they're not your friend, then you kind of have to think about, okay, now how do I position that, and how important is that to me? Is it entertainment? Is it a life lesson? Is it somebody that I want to emulate? And I just think, taking a few moments to really think about what is it? And I will say one of the biggest life skills that you'll get, and I know I got this through mentoring, is really understanding what's important to you and what do you take in and let into your psyche versus the things that are just, scenery, right? There are a lot of things that happen in our lives that feel like, oh, I need to pay attention to that. I need to pay attention to that. The most important skill that I think we can all gain, just in this journey of life, is to understand what is noise and what are the things that I need to pay attention to. And if I'm paying attention to those things and they're aligned to my values, then those are things that help me in terms of that lifelong learning and that whole thing of how do I participate in the world, and how am I about something bigger than myself, and then how do I impact the people closest to me. So I just think, I know it was a lot of words, but it's like a lot of times, early on for me, it's like I heard a lot of things, but they didn't make sense until I had some life experience to put against it. And the life experience is based upon, the pain of maybe feeling like I failed at something, or feeling like I was struggling with how to navigate through things, and then getting really locked into what's important to me and what my values are. That changes everything. And I think mentorship helps with that, because you get, I would say this too. It's like you get a lot of life lessons. And one of the things that I know for me throughout my lifetime, and I've always felt like, wow, I'm really lucky. I have a lot of mentors. It's really, I don't think it's luck. I think it's if you're curious and you ask people about their experiences, they will tell you, and they will invest in you if you show curiosity, because people have experiences that they want to share, exactly what was that thing they navigated through, and they want to make it easier for the person next after them around, here's some ways to think about when you experience something like this, how to process it for yourself. So those are the things that I would say.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I think sometimes it can be scary to reach out, but you're absolutely right that, I mean, not everybody, but but by and large, people really do want to, share the knowledge that they've gained, and make sure that the next generation sort of is able to navigate, like you said, all of the noise that they come across. Great. So turning now to Sarah. So while mentors are not specially trained mental health professionals or therapists, through your research and your signature mental health ambassadors program, we know that having a trusted adult in your life who's consistent and who shows that they care about a young person's well-being can make that person feel supported in their mental health. So can you talk a little bit about that program, and what are some practices and approaches that you have found to be meaningful when it comes to mentors being able to build trust with their mentees to help them navigate or address young people's mental health concerns and anxiety? And if applicable, how do these practices differ or remain the same depending on whether it's an in-person or a virtual mentoring relationship?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Nikki. And I just want to go back to Mark quickly. I was just taking notes because you had some really great insights. And So much of what we do in the Mental Health Ambassadors program, which is now in its second year, is actually we were able to start this program thanks to some seed funding from the Starbucks Foundation. And we train youth and adults in mental health first aid, suicide prevention, and then support them in doing an advocacy project in their community for their community around mental health. And we started this program because there was good research that youth and mentors could be trained as paraprofessionals in a skill that they could then utilize within their relationship. And we coupled that with some other research around ACEs prevention, so adverse childhood experiences prevention data that showed that mentoring could have a really profound impact on supporting young people who'd had ACEs in their lives or prevent ACEs from occurring. And so we center a youth and adult relationship in partnership to go through this process. And we do this in kind of a supported release. So we start each session with youth and adults together, and we have space for norming and community building. And then we want young people to practice autonomy just as much as we want adults to practice sharing power, because those are two of the most important skills that the folks in the program can walk away with. So we often start together, and then the youth and adults either learn the same material together or have slightly different variations of the work that they're doing. For example, on the very first session we do, we split youth and adults, and the youth learn all about their advocacy project and the role that they will take moving forward in the cohort. And youth and the adults go through a training that we developed and utilized the Mentor National Youth Voice Guide, the Youth Advocacy Guide, to learn about how to support youth and their voice and to really step back and let youth lead. And then we almost always come back together to community build and support each other as we close out the session. What we have learned from that process is that we have almost never had an issue with young people being willing to share. I think that's often a fear that people have, that young people are not going to want to talk about their mental health. The problem we have most often encountered is that adults don't know how to listen. And so we've really structured the work that we do around supporting adults to listen and to respond to what the young people want, not what the young people they think a young person is supposed to do. And so that really centers our work. And we've had some pretty transformational experiences where, like the first time we hosted one of these, an adult said something kind of inflammatory about mental health. And then the last session, the adult came up at graduation and said, I have learned to let a young person speak and to really listen. And we were like, wow, sometimes that is just the smallest thing that we can do. And going on to virtual versus in person, I think echoing what Alexandra and Mark have both said, being in person, we have found is really critical for allowing these small little moments of connection. Like you're waiting in line for pizza, or you're sitting down and you're working on a project, but online can be really important for logistics, creating space where if one person is kind of a little shyer, they have an opportunity to speak without other people speaking over them. And so I think a mix of both in a mentoring relationship is really critical. And so that's kind of how we run that.
That's so great. Yeah, and what a wonderful insight, right? Like just teaching adults how to listen. And I just want to lift up how much of this work really has to kind of center on the adults. We think of mentoring as being a youth product, right? Like it's something that benefits the youth, and it does. But in order for it to really benefit youth, there's so much work that we as adults have to sort of go through ourselves, right? To sort of be ready to do that. And yeah, not just sort of jump in with what we think is going to be the answer for the young person, but really sit back and practice some humility and really be able to listen to what this person is telling us. So thank you so much for highlighting that. And that's so much of the work of like figuring out how to make mentoring actually work. So turning now to Alexandra, can you talk a little bit more about online communities? You talked about this earlier, but can you just dive a little bit more into what are some of the positives and negatives of online communities or gaming as well for young people? Um, and what are some of the things that make that either a positive or negative experience? Because it can really go either way, obviously, be incredibly helpful or incredibly damaging, right? And so for parents, educators, or mentors, like, how do they know? How can they know, like, what is a good online environment? How can they help young people navigate these spaces, and really make sure that they're not sort of, contributing to the young to damaging this young person's mental health?
Yeah, great question. And also, I think often it can be both. It can be, it has the positives and it also has the risk and sometimes also the negatives. And I think an important thing to think about with technology in general is a lot of times we hear the term like technology addiction or video game addiction or social media addiction. And while there's research and there's definitely something there, it's unlike a lot of how we think of like substance use. It's a little bit more of a behavioral addiction, something closer to like an eating disorder where abstinence is not possible. Realistically, in 2025, you cannot abstain from technology. You cannot abstain from a video game. One thing when I teach clinicians this, one thing I love to do is like, do you play solitaire? You're a gamer. Do you play you're a gamer. You understand this. And so it's really about how do we find a balance? How do we find something that's healthy as opposed to you have to stop playing this, you have to stop engaging with social media. It's not a realistic ask for most people these days. So some of the pros that are there, as I mentioned, like it is a lifeline, especially for a lot of marginalized youth. It is a really great place for them to go and find their communities, find people, whether their peers or their mentors, find different YouTube personalities, TikTok personalities who are able to speak directly to them with that lived experience. It's also great for people with anxiety or some different things that they're not comfortable showing to people in their life, things like that, where they can be their honest self or have a little bit of safety and comfort hiding behind a screen name or something like that, where it removes some of that fear for them, and just gives them that safe environment for exploration and development. Gaming in general, I mean, there's a lot of skills that a lot of video games especially, but communication, problem solving, strategic thinking, video games are not just solitaire anymore. They are incredibly complex things. So there's a lot of like legitimate cognitive skills that they can develop. And then obviously some of the negatives are the obvious things. It's really harmful content. It's predatory behavior. It's cyberbullying. It's a lot of the extremism that sort of recruits from a lot of online communities. The gaming mechanics and the algorithms and stuff that are sort of literally made to make you addicted, to have problematic usage, affects your sleep, your academics, your relationships, things like that. Definitely the echo chambers that we're seeing more and more sort of developing of the diversity of thought, and that also leads to sort of isolation of this is all I kind of think of and all I know who's here is this. And yeah, so echo chambers are becoming more and more of a thing that we're looking at. And then, like Mark was saying, the comparison culture, the idea of the negative self-perception, the idea of, I mean, these, the filters and everything that we're dealing with, these are sort of new and scary things of how do you deal with when youth cannot, you don't know if it's real or not. You don't know if that's a realistic way for somebody to look. And then, yeah, in the ways, I mean, like Sarah was saying, listening is key. A collaborative approach is the most important. Asking them what's important, asking them, just being curious, honestly, being curious about what it is that draws them, a young person, or draws somebody to whatever they're using. It's like, why do you love TikTok? What is it that you're getting out of it? It's also a good thing to ask them and have them generate and reflect on as well, of like, what is it that does this make me feel good? Does this make me feel bad? Why am I actually doing this? And yeah, figuring out that wellness, not abstinence, not whatever, but what is it that makes you feel good? How often are you doing it? What should I do beforehand? What should I do? How much do I want to do it? And letting them really like set those guidelines. Most youth don't just want to, all I want to do is this. I don't care about anything else. It's like, okay, what else do you care about? How does this fit in? How do we make this a holistic kind of viewpoint where everything you care about can be there? Modeling healthy technology use and boundaries. This one's hard because we're all also just as guilty. So I think that's when I work with parents, sometimes that's one of the things I'm like, they see you on your phone, they see you step away, they see you doing this, and it's hard to tell them and encourage them to do something when you're not really able or willing to do it yourself. And then learning the digital, I can't think of the word now, learning the risks, the warning signs that are out there, understanding what, you know, what is going on in a lot of these communities, understanding what, you know, I'm not a fan of like, I'm going to monitor what you're doing, but where are you? What's going on? And then what are the things that are happening on some of these, like Discord has a number of things. So just really engaging with them. Hey, do you know these things? Has any of this ever happened to you? Has anyone approached you? These sort of things, and having real conversations with them depending on age appropriateness and kind of where they are. But I do think, you know, as a kid, the world is more and more complex, and as a parent it is, and there's some, or as an adult in a child's life, like there's some research and some knowledge gathering that we have to do to understand like what is happening on some of these platforms. What do we need to look out for, and then how can I help this person kind of avoid some of that?
Yeah, that's really helpful. So it sounds like it's a lot of sort of, you know, again, asking a lot of questions, being open to hearing the youth's perspective, getting really curious about what they're getting out of it, and also what else they want to be doing with their time to help them think about how to structure that time. Are there any sort of like red flags or things that folks should be like watching out for when it comes to a young person's online sort of you know, presence?
Mm-hmm. Nothing that is like clearly indicative of like this is because of this, but I think any massive social isolation, like I don't want to see my friends anymore, I don't want to do anything like that, it's a red flag for a lot of things, but one thing especially is this, is hey, what's going on? What is become a higher priority than these other things? As well as anything, obviously things like any changing of money, anything that's super secretive that they're hiding, anything that starts going along those lines. I definitely think, you know, again, it's time to start having a conversation, time to understand what they're using, and having a conversation with them. Again, sometimes younger and younger people are kind of exposed to these things and they're being exploited, and they might not know what's happening. So being able to have that conversation with them of like, hey, do you know that this is not okay? This is not an appropriate behavior. This is not something good for you.
Thanks so much. That's really helpful. So Sarah, turning to you now, can you talk about some resources that other folks, whether they be family members or educators or organizations that work with youth, that they can access if they want to learn effective strategies for speaking to young people about their mental health, or if they want to learn more about how to be an effective mentor in a young people's life?
I have so many resources and ideas. And so I can always follow up with links to all of these later, but there's a lot of great research. There's a lot of great resources to choose from. And so just starting from a mental health specific perspective, one of the resources we have been utilizing in our mental health ambassadors program, which honestly gets rave reviews from everybody that uses it, is a free mental health training called the Be There training, and it's from the Born This Way Foundation. So it's by Lady Gaga, which is kind of fun. It's a good cultural touch point. And that's really about like mental health 101. There's also Mental Health First Aid. That is a paid resource, but is a pretty comprehensive guide to supporting youth and supporting youth supporting peers in their own mental health journey. In terms of when it comes to mentoring, of course, Mentor National and Mentor Minnesota have many resources, many of which are free to or no cost to utilize, such as the Becoming a Better Mentor training, which is really all about how to talk to young people and how to develop a mentoring mindset that supports young people in a mentoring relationship. And I cannot recommend that resource enough. Funnily enough, as I was getting ready for this chat, I noticed that Jean Rhodes of Critical Mentoring had just published a meta-analysis about the importance of belonging on youth mental health outcomes. And so that, of course, I think intrinsically we know that a sense of belonging and a strong sense of identity can have really positive mental health outcomes. And so when you're thinking about supporting a young person, I think it's also important to support their whole identity. And so maybe understanding their cultural context, understanding their racial or sexual orientation. And so there are a few things that come to mind for that. Christian Rummel, who runs Mentorist, has a free training called Ally Verb training, all about LGBTQ youth. A number of mentor affiliates support training on racial equity and mentoring youth of color, and that's called the Essentials training. And so I think it's really important. Of course, this is all very community specific, and I really think that's where this should live. But if you're wanting to support a young person, ask them what they want you to know about them, and then follow up and learn about them. One other resource just around supporting youth mental health is to, and this might be very Minnesota specific, but I imagine it could be in many states across the country, is Minnesota has something called the Suicide Prevention Coalition Network. So every county in Minnesota has a suicide prevention coalition, and they're a wonderful resource. They have very community-tied resources that young people can utilize. So that's a network we're very ingratiated into. So again, I'm an open book. I feel like that I am embodying my librarian, Judith Blank, and just giving you a list of resources, but that's truly what we're here for. So you can always feel free to reach out to me or any other affiliate in the network, because I think we all want young people to succeed. And so I want to make sure that adults are equipped for that purpose.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So turning now to Mark, looking at it from an employer perspective, can you talk about the challenges of isolation and anxiety and loneliness, and how do these issues tie into the challenges that you and other employers face in attracting, supporting, and retaining young talent? And what are some of the programs or initiatives that you have to build a sense of belonging, whether that's in person or virtually, which are crucial for young people's development, mental health, and of course, success at work?
All right. So the first thing I would say is everything that happens in our communities happens in our companies. Okay. So those things are not separated. And so when you think about, anxiety, loneliness, all the things, if it's food insecurity, all the things that sometimes, people think that they separate their personal lives from their work lives, it shows up in work as well. And so for us and I know I talked a little bit about our core values. Belong and enjoy are two of our values. And so the way that we bring those things to life is we have employee resource groups, and employee resource groups are open to everybody, right? And so it gives people an opportunity to learn, like Sarah mentioned, it gives people an opportunity to learn about different cultures, to learn in terms of how lived experience shows up differently for different people, and how do we create a place where there is value and a place for everyone. And that's a big thing, right? We also, like, one of the things we do at Starbucks, and this was a surprise for me when I started at Starbucks, right? It's like we'll do, like, before meetings, we'll do coffee tastings, and it's really where we just kind of slow ourselves down to just say we're going to connect over coffee. And I will tell you, what that does is it creates an opportunity to hear, to be heard, and to share what's on your mind in the moment. Sometimes somebody might talk about something that they're experiencing in their everyday life that other people don't experience. Sometimes it's about joy. Sometimes it's about, hey, let me tell you what my experience is and what happened to me on the way to work today, and why it's so hard living in my skin, living in the identity group that I walk around in every day. And what it does is it creates a place where we can share and talk about those things so that people understand that's not, those things aren't all happening to other people. Those are happening to people that you work with and you see every day, and it happens every day. So that's one of the things. We also push really hard to have inclusive leadership as one of the leadership acumens here at Starbucks. And so what that means is get to know people that are on your team. It's like, and so it's really much more simple than what people think it is sometimes. Sometimes it's just saying, hey, tell me about yourself. Tell me what's important to you. Tell me how I support you. Tell me how I share your successes, how I coach you, how I give you feedback. How do I help you bring your voice into a room if you've got an idea? Because I'll tell you from my own development and experience, it's like coming into a corporate setting, I felt like the risk for me being wrong was so high that I didn't share my voice a lot of times. And I will tell you, one of the things when you think about corporate settings, and you think about companies, is like there are too many companies that don't hear from all of their employees, and especially their younger employees, because the thing is you have a lot to say. You're experiencing this world in a very different way than the most senior leaders at a company are experiencing them. And so your voice is very important to how companies show up in the world. What I'm also seeing, Nikki, is that when we think about how do we engage, younger folks into Starbucks as an employer, it's we've got to mean something bigger than ourselves. We have to care about the environment. We have to care about, how do we support individuals, and how do we value your lived experience? And it's one of those things, it's value your lived experience and not just kind of incorporate it into everything we do. It's like, how do you value it? So then all of a sudden you feel like you can share, you can contribute. If you're, it's like we try to take the fear out of being wrong or failing, because I will say it's like the more you get into historically marginalized groups, inclusive of women, it's like the more the stakes feel high to have to get something right, because your voice might not ever be listened to again if you get it wrong, right? And so we try to create places where we have psychological safety in terms of how do we share ideas, and how do we not make it so big for someone to say something in a room that the outcomes of it might just be too heavy, right? And so those are things we do. We don't get it right all the time, but what we do is we focus on it. And we focus on, and one of the things that we do is when we introduce ourselves, we share our pronouns. And it's not necessarily for me to share my pronouns. It's for us to say, hey, we are welcoming, how different identities come into the organization. And so we're going to create a place where we make it really clear that we value people for their lived experience and who you are, so that and that's the thing. So sometimes we get into conversations where people are like, well, I don't have to share my pronouns. It's like no, it's about creating a place where it is welcomed, right? And so those are the things we do. And like I said, we don't always get it right, but what we do is we push to get it right. And I think that's the thing in these spaces is you're going to get things wrong, but the focus is that we're trying, and we're creating places of inclusion. We're creating places where people can bring their lived authentic selves, not your full self. Because when people say that to me, I can bring my full self. I don't bring my full self to home. My wife is like, no, no, don't bring all of that. But I mean, just bring your authentic self into places where you're working with people, and any place. And I think every company, every community, it's like you're working with people. And so the more that you can create spaces where we understand that there's a uniqueness to all of us, and how do we harness that uniqueness? That's what we shoot for.
Yeah, Mark, I think that with that you've really gotten to the heart of what so much of both mentoring is about, but also just any time that we're trying to support somebody is just valuing their uniqueness, right? Understanding them as an individual and taking the time to ask those questions and understand them as a unique individual and what they have to contribute to the world. And I think that that's the biggest thing that's so valuable to all of us, that when we think about our own mentors in the past and things like that, that's what sort of stands out, is that ability for somebody to really see us.
Yeah. And Nikki, I would say this too, and then I'll stop, is is this is the other thing too, is it's like if leaders can't operate in a way where they value experiences and they can connect with different people at different stages in their career, different lived experience, then they shouldn't be a leader. I mean, that's just kind of what it comes down to. That's what
Yeah.
leadership is about. Leadership is about, being able to unlock the capability in people around you. And that means you have to be an inclusive leader and you have to be able to connect with people who are the same and who are very different, right?
Mm.
And you have to value both those things. So anyway, that's what I would add to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. That was great. Um, so I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to direct it to Sarah first, but then everybody else is welcome to share. Can folks talk about specific programs or initiatives that you've seen that have been effective for specifically for addressing young people's mental health challenges and help to build a greater sense of community and belonging? And I'm going to add to that for you, Sarah. Um, is there something that you can share with our attendees about if somebody has a real concern about a young person's mental health, like what's that next step that they can sort of take with that young person when it becomes something that's sort of like, oh, there should be a trained professional working on this, and how do you kind of are there other sort of resources or initiatives that you can kind of pass them off to, or what does that look like?
Yeah, and that's a great question. We get a lot of questions like that from both mentoring professionals and from mentors. So if you're working with a young person and you're concerned about their mental health or an issue has been flagged, we utilize the process as outlined in the mental health first aid training, which is there's power in talking with a young person and asking them directly, are you having thoughts about suicide? Do you have a plan to harm yourself? So identifying that, getting comfortable asking that question is really critical. Starting that conversation and listening from a non-judgmental place. From there, because mentors are not trained professionals, and we don't want to put anybody in a position where they feel like they have to be the mental health support for a young person, like the only support. From there, either you as a mentor or you as an adult can have a conversation with a young person about, thank you for telling me that. Let's look at how we can navigate this together. Let's look at resources together. I will call with you, or here's a resource and I will follow up with you. So really being that point of reference, that guide for a young person to seek help. There's also power in looping in a caregiver if that feels safe, or a coordinator if that feels safe, reaching out to your local mental health resources, but doing that critically and right away. So having that conversation, opening up, listening, and then guiding to find supports is really what we recommend. When it comes to initiatives that we've seen be really helpful, a lot of these are either centered in youth voice, so supporting a young person in advocating for their own community, their own needs. So a lot of YPAR projects, I think, are really critical ways for young people to take their idea, take their opportunity, and create change. But then also programs that really do center around belonging, which has been a core part of this conversation. So we have some local programs that I'm just going to shout out. One, I believe, is on the call, but a program called Mentor North in Duluth. They were part of our first mental health ambassadors program, and their young people created a school resource library talking about mental health resources. Two others that I know of are Autism Mentorship Program, which is a program for and by autistic adults and youth. So really centering identity. So identity is not the issue. Like, it's not the other that some people experience. It is just a core part of how you connect with each other. Another one that we have locally is Queer Space Collective, which is by and for queer adults and youth, really centering identity so that it's less a hurdle and more just the fabric of connection. So things that center identity, I know Mark spoke to that, things that center joy, and then as adults, making sure that we are listening and we're guiding and supporting rather than taking over for a young person, but really appreciate that question.
Great. And for folks that are not aware, YPAR stands for Youth Participatory Action Research. And we actually just released a guide for those interested on these kind of projects. So we'll share some information in the chat about that as well. Great. Alex, any other sort of programs or initiatives that you would like to lift up?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I think when I think about specific initiatives, I always think context and community-based are key. Youth is not a monolith. I'll plug Healthy Gamer. We do sort of three main things. We do content, community, and coaching. So if anyone knows, Dr. K is our man at the helm. He has a YouTube channel, Healthy Gamer, and posts a lot of self-help and information on mental health. He's a psychiatrist by trade, so a lot of psychoeducation things. Then we have a community that has a ton of different offerings, and then we have coaching if someone wanted one-on-one or group support in that. Two other initiatives that really stand out for me, I believe one is only in Seattle and or Washington still, but Forefront Suicide Prevention has been incredible. They have a school-based suicide prevention program where they go into the schools and the entire school community gets trained in their roles. So whether you're a teacher, how do you do this? The students, how do you do this for your peers? It's been a very successful initiative that I love to see, because again, it's community focused and what do they need? And then one that I learned about this year that I've been really impressed with is called the Confess Project. And this is an initiative that trains barbers and beauticians specifically for the Black community on being mental health advocates, and really like who's sitting down and who's talking to you and giving them the skills and the ability to help them, and just to kind of flag if things are going on that maybe they can provide resources for. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to turn us now to the Q&A, just so that we make sure that we have enough time to get to some of the great questions that we're getting from our attendees today. And again, attendees, if you have a question, please do put that into the Q&A section. You can see on the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A button. If you have questions that you want to ask, please put those there. And we will get to as many of those as humanly possible during this time. So our first question is just about sort of how we pair youth with mentors, and asking about what our stance is when youth asked to be maybe paired with somebody of a different gender. Or I think that we could take this as a broader question about identity in general. I think, maybe sometimes folks think, oh, we should put like with like and things like that for the best possible outcomes. But, what are your thoughts on that? And in what cases do you think, you want to switch up the background of the mentor for the mentee? And I guess, direct this first to Sarah, because you're sort of directly working on on those mentor matches. But if anyone else wants to weigh in, feel free.
Yeah, I saw that question and was starting to prep. So this is, I guess, another plug for a great resource, which honestly was foundational to my work as a program director, is also a resource that we utilize, we train on at Mentor Minnesota. So that's Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring. The 5th edition just came out in January, and it is incredible. I'm not sure if Mike Geringer from Mentor National is on here, and he could probably answer some of these better than I could, but research currently is kind of mixed on whether or not a same gender match is completely necessary. But your program may have rules or guidelines that dictate the gender of a match. There are also some considerations with your insurance provider, because that's often a really hot button issue with your insurance provider. However, the research shows that the most effective mentoring relationships, and I'm just going to read this directly, are most positive when the mentor and mentee share attitudes, beliefs, values, hobbies, interests, talents, identities, and personalities. So I do think if that is something your young person is experiencing, that should be a conversation with them, with their caregiver, with the mentor, and it needs to be a conversation that's held jointly. And then oversight of that match should be following all of the rules and guidelines that your program has set in place. So there is no, in my opinion, no hard and fast rule, but that needs to be a conversation with the many stakeholders that are at the table.
Hey, Nikki, let me add to this because I think
Okay.
we have mentorship programs and we have played with this quite a bit because what we do is we try to take a pretty good inventory around what are you trying to accomplish in mentorship, right? Because what we try not to do is we try not to say, hey, that's a Black partner, so we need to have a Black mentor. It's like sometimes that's needed. Sometimes people are trying to figure out how do I navigate in my identity through systems and processes. Sometimes you really want to understand a very different perspective and you can learn and grow from a very different perspective. And so I think it comes down to making sure that we do a really good inventory of what are you trying to accomplish in a mentorship. And then I think, Sarah, I agree 100% in terms of, okay, now let's match, like a lot of the personality things. How are you going to be able to hear each other and talk to each other? And values are aligned in a pretty good way because it should be a two-way street in terms of mentorship. And so I always wrestle with like not just going right to like for like, but making sure we understand what are people trying to get out of a mentorship so then you get the thing you're trying to get out of it.
I'm also going to add really quickly, one of the things that I learned early in my career was sometimes our assumptions are not equating everything. And as a therapist, I was always like, of course, like I'm more comfortable with a female. Wouldn't boys be more comfortable with a male? But honestly, especially because of how men are acculturated to interact with each other and some of the posturing and things, it's not as safe to be vulnerable with a male. For a lot of men, I work mostly with young boys, and so that's something to think about, of depending on the type of work you're doing in that mentoring, like, and discuss with them, right, of like, who are you most comfortable with, and is there that openness to be vulnerable, or is that something that you want to work on and work with another man and work on being vulnerable in those situations.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask a question that sort of gets a little bit to the heart of what might be a little bit of an elephant in the room, which is the current sort of political situation and the sort of rolling back of DEI initiatives and the sort of changing way that these sorts of initiatives are being funded or supported. And many individuals and adults may be concerned about feeling safe to share their experiences. And so, in the face of this, how can we, as mentors, leaders, people who run these programs, how can we create and maintain environments where open dialogue and vulnerability are still encouraged and protected, and that we're still building what we know to be very important, belonging, even if we are not necessarily sort of maybe, sometimes calling them the same things or, phrasing them the same way?
I can start, and then I'm really curious, Mark and Alexandra, what you think too. But all young people have a gender, have a sexuality, have a race, have an experience. And so we are supporting a holistic person. And as mentors and leaders, what we can do is show them that they belong, that they are valuable, that we will support them. I think there are some important safety concerns we would want to consider. So for example, if we're doing a survey, consider making that anonymous if you're asking important, critical questions around race, gender, sexuality, anything like that, ability status. And so I think being open about how we are supporting them, not shying away from supporting people of all different types. And then also being really open and honest about when we are, for example, making something anonymous and why, or having a really clear, like, if you're not feeling safe answering this, you don't have to. If you're interested in learning more, reach out privately. And so just being upfront and doing that before there are questions asked.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I think some of this is as personal as well as depending on the program and who you're with, of how much you want to push. But I think a really important thing is the conversation's happening. They know the conversation's happening. Being transparent about, like, even if you're like, we can't say that, like, we're not going to say this, but this is, because of this reason. Not, we're just going to completely remove this language from our materials and we're just going to not address it. And then I also think really engaging in that conversation with them as much as you can. And for me, it's continuing to kind of to have those discussions, to use the language. And sometimes that language is different because of who they are. What language are they using? What is comfortable for them? One thing with Healthy Gamer, we have a lot of people who are more on the alt-right and are kind of involved in a lot of the toxic internet culture, and we navigate, how do we have that conversation with them when maybe we're drastically different. And I think it is really just being transparent about that conversation and non-judgmental and open to what are your perspectives on it, and like, we're accepting of that and let's continue that discussion, whatever it is, as far as if you're in a group or something, safety and respect of other people. But yeah.
Yeah, we keep ourselves really grounded in our why, and our why is we want to create warmth and belonging in our stores. We also want to create warmth and belonging in our workplace. And so things outside are always going to change. And so when you think about the period of time with George Floyd, it's like we knew who we were then. We were locked into, how do we value inclusion? How do we value the diversity of all of the, thought leadership and thought partnership we get from our partners? And it's like, and we're in that same place now. We understand, we have a company that's based in culture and values, and based in, we believe that diversity is a strength for us as a company. So we're going to create inclusive spaces. And I just think that sometimes the things that, are outwardly said, it's like, I'm just a big believer in people, like, your actions will show what you value. And so grand, big statements, to me just aren't the thing. I think the thing is how do you operate, with people, and do you treat people respectfully? Do you have an inclusive environment, and do you value diversity of lived experience as well as work experience? And those are the things we focus on.
That's great. That's great. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it all sort of comes back to when we're talking about, interacting with young people, it comes back to sort of that, again, valuing of individuals and all individuals, and understanding that we all have various different parts of our personalities and identities. Doesn't matter what those are, right? But being welcoming and sort of putting our arms around folks, no matter what those are. Great. Okay, we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I'm going to ask the next one from an attendee. And this is about evaluating, how do we evaluate belonging and connectedness in our programs? Do folks have ways that we are sort of measuring that in order to show the impact of what we're doing?
I could start with this because this is one of the areas that we've been exploring and we've been working with for a while. So we have, employee engagement surveys. And so inside of our engagement surveys, we have questions around inclusive environments, feeling valued and all the things. And so what we've done is we've looked at those questions that are a part of our employee engagement survey that align to belonging and inclusive behaviors. And then we've just looked back over the last 5 years. We said, hey, what's the average? What would it, how would we think about if we're doing things the right way, and if we're engaging people the right way, how would we move those responses? Because it's anonymous in terms of the survey, and it goes to our whole company. And so that's one of the ways that we're looking at it, is we're saying we want to hear from, because I think belonging is one of those unique things belonging is active. It takes a feedback loop to understand belonging. So you can't say, hey, Mark feels belonging at the company without me telling you what I feel about it, right? Because that is, and then it creates a feedback loop. So then it's like my response to do I feel belonging is important because then I can tell you why I do, I can tell you why I don't. And so that's one of the things that we've grabbed onto is measuring it through that so that we understand sentiment of our partners.
I think from a kind of nerdy perspective, if you're working in a program or you're starting a program, there are a couple of indexes you can also use. I'm thinking of one called the Relationship Quality Index, I think is what we typically utilize in programs, which is a 6-question index to identify if young people and adults feel connected to each other. But I also echo what Mark says. I think there are ways that you can do that in in conversation, in communication, in shorter surveys. So there are a few other ways. And that's definitely one of the more technical ways that you can also measure that.
I'll just add in, I think also, like we talked about, like the behavioral and I think what's the engagement? How frequently do people attend things? We all want to belong, so we're going to be more incentivized to, like, if we feel like we belong, to engage in those things and keep it up. So I think retention statistics and things like that also really speak to that question.
Great. Well, we are just about out of time here. I want to take a moment to thank our panelists once again. Alexandra, Mark, Sarah, you guys have been really wonderful. This has been a really great conversation about how to support mental health with young people. And I just encourage folks to, take a look at the links that were shared. There's lots of great resources shared. I'm sure that we will share an email after this with some more information. So be on the lookout for that. And once again, thank you all for taking the time to connect with us all today. We really appreciate you spending the time and having this really valuable conversation. Thanks, everybody.